I fully agree with what Jamal just said, that it would be a mistake to look at any development through the prism of an earlier development. The military know it. They always say the generals prepare for the last war, and they're always unprepared for the one war that really comes. But while there are no simple lessons to be taught from the Central European transition of 20 years ago to the Arab transitions of today, some elements are too similar not to draw conclusions. And Jamal himself, after warning us not to look at the Arab world through the Eastern European prism, you gave us a few very practical lessons drawn from the East European experience that are relevant to the Arab experience today. So allow me to continue for a few minutes in the same vein. My background is originally from underground publishing in Poland in the 80s. I run an underground newspaper. And in the 80s, Poland was run by a very brutal communist military dictatorship. And as probably all of us here in this room know, a dictatorship is good, especially for one thing, producing jokes. And one of my favorites tells of a young man distributing leaflets on a Warsaw street under the military regime. Of course, the police arrive, they beat him up, they handcuff him, they dump him in the police car, and then one of the cops picks up the leaflet, looks at it, turns it around, says, "Hey, mister, there's nothing written here." And the guy answers, "What should I write? Everything is clear." And I'm sure all of us, be it from Central Europe, be it from the Middle East, we have been through situations where, yes, everything is clear. There's the good guys and the bad guys, and hopefully the good guys will win. But then you think again, and you realize that possibly not everything is clear. This is the moment journalism begins. Journalism is about everything not being clear, about finding out, about investigating, reporting, and discussing. And we all have lived in countries which had official journalism, which looked like the real thing, the way a stuffed bird might look like a real bird, except it can't fly. So what can you do to transform the stuffed bird into a living animal once again, once you've overthrown the regime? How do you turn the fish soup back into the aquarium, as it were? A few lessons might help. One of the things that made Poland remarkably successful in changing its media scene after '89 was the underground period. In the underground, we had literally thousands of underground publications, from daily newspapers to philosophical quarterlies. Unofficial government, unpublished government statistics gave at 4 million the number of Poles who, according to the government, had regular access to such publications. We had effectively broken the government's information barrier. What this meant is we had a cadre of competent, experienced journalists. The communist regime, like any other dictatorship, destroyed the work ethic. You learned the work ethic in the underground. If you did not work well, you ended up in jail. It was as simple as that. It was a very practical, almost Darwinian mechanism for weeding out those who were not willing to work according to the rules of the profession. But second and more important, the only thing we in the underground had going for us was credibility. If the government caught us lying just once, if they could prove that the underground press is not telling the truth, our credibility would be in tatters. We could not recover it. We learned the hard way the principles of professional journalism. And thus, in '89, when the transition started, and it started to a large extent thanks to us, the underground journalists, we had people who actually were capable of taking over the government newspapers, government radio, government TV, and trying to convert them into something resembling normal media. This is an asset. In other Central European countries, take Romania as a counterexample, where there had not been a massive movement of free press. the media, although formally free, even today struggle to be a genuine media and allowing free discussion and professional reporting. It's like democracy. I mean, it's not democratic institutions that create democracy, it's Democrats. It's not a formally free media system that ensures that you'll get a free media. It's independent professional journalists. In those countries we're lucky enough to have an opposition underground journalistic system, you're lucky. Those people will be able to fill the gap. When you don't have independent journalists, train them. You'll need them. They cannot be improvised. But, as Jamal reminded us, what are we supposed to do with the thousands of people in government employ who, until the moment of transition, were officially called journalists, even if some other less polite words sometime would be more applicable? Some of them, possibly quite a few of them, can change. Others you'll have to get rid of. And this opens a huge can of worms that I'll leave to our next speaker to address, being how do you get rid of the bad guys without hurting the good guys? The short answer is you can't. There's always a level of injustice when you try to purge people. The question is, how do you balance off this injustice against the injustice of not purging them? But just as importantly, it's not enough to have good journalists. You have to have independent media. Independent media mean media that don't take money from anybody. So the first obligation of a free newspaper is to be a good business, to turn a profit. Because if a newspaper is not paying its own bills, somebody else is paying for it, and that newspaper is no longer free. Even that somebody else is a foreign NGO with the best intentions in the world, if you do not control your finances, you do not control your thinking. And this applies to individual journalists as well. Sergei yesterday from Kommersant, the Russian daily, reminded us of corruption amongst journalists. In the former Soviet Union, this is assumed disaster proportions. I do a lot of media work in the former Soviet Union. In Russia, over 40% of journalists actually do take money from outside their office to write positive or negative articles about people that are paid to criticize or to attack. It's become so prevalent that many of our professional colleagues in the former Soviet Union don't see a problem with that. But the problem obviously is there, because if the public knows that journalists can be paid to criticize or praise, that means the public knows that the journalists are no longer working in their interests, in the public's interests. Once a crackdown starts, why should I, the man in the street, protect journalists? They didn't do anything to protect my interests. They were promoting their own interests. Those of us who have followed Russia and have seen the hopelessly small crowd taking Anya Politkovskaya to her grave, the great Russian journalist was murdered a couple of years ago, about 1,500 people were with her. And she was the great of Russian journalism. This shows just how devastating corruption in our own ranks can be. But there is more. Although in the underground, we learned very quickly not to lie because that would destroy our credibility, well, we were obviously still part of the struggle. And therefore, yes, we engaged in propaganda, we denounced the bad guys, in that occasion the communist regime, and promoted our good guys. As long as this was part of an unfair struggle when we could not compete freely with the regime, that was fair. But when we won, and our friends suddenly became prime ministers and presidents and ministers and God knows what else, it was terribly difficult to realize that we were supposed to investigate them just as thoroughly and just as brutally as we would have investigated the communists. It just didn't seem fair. These were the good guys, right? They were us. We won. In Poland, it took us some 2 years to realize that. In the space of 2 years, something pretty extraordinary happened. One of the most hated men in Poland under communism was the military government spokesman, a gentleman by the name of Jerzy Urban. Like many other communist apparatchiks, he also made a lot of money out of his function, and after '89, he used that money to create a weekly called Nie, in Polish that means no, a weekly that blasted out of the water the new democratic authorities, our friends, the good guys, whom we refrained from criticizing. Nie became the single biggest success story of the post-'89 Polish media scene. At its heyday, it sold 250,000 copies every week. Because we had not done our job the way we should have done, because we had not investigated from the very beginning our friends in power as we should have done, we left an opening for a truly deceitful bastard to become the champion of what journalism should be, investigating the government, and make incredible tons of money in the process. Serves us right. But we also thought in the new democratic Poland that our job as journalists is, well, to educate the public. We were the more advanced, right? We were the victorious Democrats, we had fought, we have credentials. In the newspaper we from the underground had set up, and I still work for, Gazeta Wyborcza, when the first free presidential campaign took place, which pitted two democratic candidates against each other, Lech Wałęsa, the trade union leader, and Tadeusz Mazowiecki, our first non-communist prime minister, the newspaper in its majority supported Mazowiecki, who was a liberal, against Wałęsa, who was a populist. That meant most of our journalists supported Mazowiecki against Wałęsa. Fine. But we, in our infinite wisdom, also decided that the newspaper should support Mazowiecki against Wałęsa. We endorsed Mazowiecki. We thought that this will not affect our coverage. We foolishly thought so. Of course it did affect our coverage. Our coverage of the candidate we supported was much more positive than our coverage of the candidate we were against. Now, it so happened that most of our readers also supported Mazowiecki, the candidate we favored. But to our complete surprise, we got literally thousands of letters from readers telling us, your job is not to tell me how to vote. Your job is to give me all the information I need to decide on my own how to vote. We lost a great deal of credibility because of this kind of involvement. I'm not exactly sure how this kind of lessons play out in the Arab world. Our societies are different, and the world is different today. We had the good luck of having our transition 20 years ago when Europe was financially and politically welcoming. Without the support of the European community, we possibly might not have made it. Your situation is much more difficult. Therefore, yes, it is true, I'm very reluctant to convey lessons across the divide. But one thing I'm very sure of, it can be done. All the arguments that I hear today about why the Arab Spring will not really succeed, why there'll be another dictatorship, the reasoning that, well, the nations of the Arab states are not prepared for democracy, and there's the danger of the religious extremists taking over. I've heard them about Poland 20 years ago. And you know what? The critics were right 20 years ago in the sense that, yes, it could have happened. The critics might be, unfortunately, right today. Yes, it might happen today to you too. But this works both ways. In all common sense, 1989, the toppling of communism with almost no bloodshed should not have happened. It was a mystery. It was a mystery. It was a miracle. And I have drawn a very practical moral conclusion from that. Somebody who has witnessed 1989 no longer has the right to be a pessimist. If we made it, you can. Good luck.